The biggest challenge of this, of course, was I'd never been faced with that before. I had a team of volunteers who'd never been faced with that before, and the community didn't understand it either.
This is A Little Life. Everyone feels a lack of inspiration at times. Sometimes a bit overwhelmed and feeling like we're going through life on autopilot. Taking that next step is always scary. This show is meant to be a practical guide for anyone listening, no matter what stage of life they're in. Each episode, I speak with a different guest who is building a meaningful life for themselves in different parts of the world. Whether it's addressing social issues through hip hop music in India, spreading awareness about endangered animals on an island in the Pacific Ocean, to tackling invisible illnesses through the help of technology, or making couture fashion from old newspapers, we discuss career choices, personal growth, and doing some good with the time that we have. After all, it's only a little life. My name is Aniket, and I work in the music industry at a company called Outdustry. We specialize in the India and China music markets, and we're working towards building a fair and rewarding ecosystem for creators who give us awesome music to listen to. Before Outdustry, I was working in the fintech space in London for a company called Accenture, and I focused on digital payments. In 2018, I decided to take what I had learned and apply it to something that I cared deeply about, which is music. And I ended up moving back home to India and haven't looked back since. My first guest is Ben Howitt. He is a wildlife conservationist and he is currently based in the UK. He's also a very dear friend of mine for nearly a decade now. Ben is brilliant and he has so many interesting stories that this conversation went on a lot longer than I had expected it to. So, to capture all of that, I'm splitting this first episode into two parts. Part one is super topical, given the craziness around coronavirus right now. And for context, we recorded this towards the end of March in 2020. Part two is its own trip, and I'm going to let you hear why directly from Ben in the next episode. And I'll spend the next minute or so introducing Ben before we actually jump into the conversation. But if you want to get straight into it, you can skip ahead. A quick heads up though, we recorded this conversation on Skype and my voice sometimes sounds a bit muffled, but thankfully Ben's comes through very clearly. Now, who is Ben? Ben was actually my first friend in university in Bristol, which is 2 hours west of London. He studied veterinary sciences at uni, which is a 5 year course, and he has been practicing since he graduated in 2016. Ben's dad is English and his mum is Argentinian. And he grew up as an expat in Singapore before returning to the UK for university. His first job out of uni was at an animal clinic in Guernsey, which is an island off the coast of France. He then spent the next 8 months as the lead vet at the Darwin Animal Clinic in the Galapagos Islands in the Pacific Ocean. The clinic was named after Charles Darwin. And for trivia nerds, Darwin's visit to the Galapagos Islands in the mid 1800s had a huge impact on the formation of his theory of evolution via natural selection. This was an amazing conversation. Ben is truly a great guy, and there's a lot to learn from him. So, without further ado, I give you Ben Howitt, Part 1. I hope you enjoy. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Really good to catch up with you.
Yeah, man, thanks. It's been crazy that we have to actually get onto a podcast to see each other because we haven't spoken in a long time.
And
But
it's required a global isolation pandemic for us to.
yeah, exactly. That's how much I like you. Where are you now?
I'm in Bath, actually,
Okay.
so I'm in the countryside, which is quite lucky at this
Nice.
time.
Is it quite isolated?
Yeah, it's quite isolated, and thankfully the sun's out. We've got a garden, so we can at least escape these poor people in flats like yourself. I feel a lot. It's
Happy,
difficult.
happy days.
Yeah, happy days.
So let's dive straight in, and I thought we can start by kind of giving anyone who's listening a bit of context. So, do you want to give like a brief background as to your motivations behind getting into veterinary sciences? Like, is that something you always wanted to do? How did that come about?
Yeah, I think the answer to that question has changed, and it depends on who I'm speaking to as well. I think the idea behind veterinary science is it encompasses so many areas into one. I enjoyed working with animals, and of course, there's a lot of careers you can do that with. But I also enjoyed the science and the medical aspect. There's the potential to go into research there. You have it, but the most important bit for me as well is that it also encompassed the practical side. So you can work practically within science, and medicine is very similar, but I wanted to go into more the veterinary aspect, wildlife. I found that more exciting when I was that age, 17, 18. And the beauty of it, I mean, that was my focus. It was practical, animal oriented, and medical oriented.
And
So
you
there was,
knew from the start, like, this is what I want to do.
yeah, I think I had my uncle was was a vet in Argentina, believe it or not. And once when I was really young, we went out to see him, and I think I was fairly stuck on that path when I must have been 13, 14,
Okay.
and I didn't budge from it. And so I went through the whole school with that
Nice.
direction.
Was there ever a point where you're like, I could do that, or I could do something else?
Um, You know what? I don't think there was in one. There were so many options available, and our school was huge. It was an international school in Singapore, UWC, and we had so many different people who wanted to go down different paths. I think I was quite stubborn in wanting to achieve that.
Yeah.
Wanted to. Everybody was so set on career goals at that age, which is a huge amount of stress for a lot of people who don't know what they want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I was so ready to avoid that I had
Yeah.
set my mind on it. And I said, I'm going to do this. Nobody can change my mind. So I could just avoid that entire uncertainty. And it was quite lucky I had that influence when I was younger. And it just set me on that path, which was brilliant.
Sick, man. So let's get stuck in with your journey of being a vet. Like now you've made the decision. Can you like sort of break down for dummies what would the difference in education be for a vet versus medicine?
There's a lot more similarities between medicine and veterinary than differences. But the difference with the veterinary course is that you're very much, after 5 years, you're needing to come out as a fully functional or as functional surgeon.
Yeah.
So you, no doubt, once you graduate, you're not a competent vet. Usually, I'd say you're not a competent vet till at least you're a year or two out of university. But you are expected, with support, to go straight out and perform surgeries, neutering, for example, spades and stuff like that. While medicine more goes towards sort of an academic researcher, practical route, that then they require further courses, depending on which area of medicine they want to go through. Surgeon, they could talk about that in much more detail than me.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. So there's a lot more to cram in to that period of time.
So then, how did your job at Guernsey come about?
So I actually have family there as well. And since all my family, the rest of my family, parents and things were abroad in Singapore while I was studying, I had nowhere really to stay for my placements, So I went over and stayed with my grandparents in Guernsey, and I worked at the practice there as a placement in my fourth and fifth year. And then when I left, they offered me a job, and I went over, and it's a fantastic place to start. It was
Nice.
it was growing. There were about 10 vets, a good 40 staff. They had CT machine, had just started up and running, so that's quite high tech for,
Okay.
as you can imagine. And the beauty of it as well is that it was mixed practice, so I could practice, well, just learn skills in all the different fields because I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do
Yeah.
yet.
Did you have someone that you were working under or learning from, or was it a more decentralized kind of learning process?
I was learning under all of them really. All of the vets there were quite well established in their careers, so I had all of their expertise for me, which was really lucky.
Yeah.
Some had better skills with horses, others better skills with cows, others really good surgeons, so I could pick and mix which mentor I had for which case. So it was fantastic for my first year and a half, 2 years.
That sounds sick. And what prompted the change?
So I was from the upbringing, to be honest, in Singapore. I mean, we were always fairly, sitting still was not something I was prepared to do for very long, especially in my mid-20s.
Yeah.
And I was always going to move away from Guernsey. And then, so after about 2.5 years, I felt really confident and competent in my work. And I found an advert on Facebook, believe it or not.
No way.
Yeah, and it was on one of these groups called Veterinary Charity or Volunteering. And there was a position opening for veterinary manager to go down to a clinic in the Galapagos.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, well, that was an opportunity that I couldn't really give a miss. And so I applied and I had a Skype interview, and they were a lovely team, and they gave me the position, okay, to start not too long after. And it was brilliant. Going down to the Galapagos it's a dream for a lot of people, including myself. It's just certainly if you have that interest and that passion for wildlife, and I went down, and it was a charity clinic, so not very big. It was run by volunteers, and I was going to be taking on the position as the managing vet, and that was really attractive because I felt really confident, and I thought, let's give it a go. And I wanted some manager experience just to try and see how I liked it. And it was a huge eye opener. Going from a very high tech clinic into a clinic with the bare basics and the necessities. It's very difficult. You go from working up every single case with blood tests, and diagnostics, and then you go and you have none. So you don't know. And so it was trying to relearn how to deal in sort of an environment that doesn't have it. And it was just such a good learning curve for me. And then at the same time, all of the clients were Spanish speakers, so I was suddenly immersed myself in an environment where I had a base in Spanish, but I now had to do a consultation in a whole different language and still trying to figure out what was going on.
Okay.
So suddenly I had that, which I had to pick up really quickly.
And all of this is in the span of months.
In months, absolutely. I arrived there in March, and I was up and running on my own as manager in 2 weeks later.
So back up 1 second. Like, you've seen this ad on Facebook, and you've clicked on the job profile, and it says the chief vet or the managing vet at the Darwin Animal Clinic in the Galapagos Islands. They're like, okay, that seems interesting. What information did you have before you made the decision?
Well, I think I did know that it was Spanish speaking. So I did, I had this, so I did take lessons again before going, and I knew they had, the clinic had about 10 years behind it of different, they changed manager every 6 months or a year, because it was effectively a voluntary position. You have, pay your way for food and stuff, but and accommodation, which was great. And, but I was at the point in my career where I was so ready for change, but not knowing what that change was, or what I wanted, that I saw the
Yeah.
opportunity. I don't think there was much that was going to convince me otherwise. I think, it was such an attractive opportunity. It was, it was just 6 months to start with. It wasn't going to be a long, um, the end of the world. 6 months is not the end of the
Fair.
world. It's in
Okay.
Galapagos, which is the center of Darwinism and theory of evolution. And, it's always wonders of David Attenborough. I thought, God, can you imagine anything better than that?
Yeah.
And, and I applied for it, and I suddenly convinced myself, that I didn't want to do anything but. Um,
Easy.
and I think, I in one respect, I do have a habit of just sticking my head in and figuring it out as I go along, which is
Yeah.
great in some environments, not great in others. So, you choose. Um, but I wanted to just get stuck in. I wanted to change. I wanted to get out of Europe, and I took it. And so I knew the basics. I was very confident in my ability as a vet. Um, and but it was very stressful, at
Yeah.
least for 6 weeks, because within 8 days of me taking over the management, we had a campaign organized, which is a sterilization campaign. And what that is we packed up the clinic, all our supplies. We got all our volunteers who are, a lot of them are students, so they're not experienced vets. And we shipped all that stuff over to another of the islands called Isabella. And there we did a very intense 3-day sterilization campaign, and we'd sterilize between 65 and 115 animals in 3 days with a very small team of 6 people. And we did do this with the government. The government were fantastic in allowing us to, for us to support and join in with these campaigns.
So what was this campaign meant to achieve? Like sterilizing in what sense?
So the whole notion behind conservation, it's trying to tackle a completely different side of conservation with these clinics, and that is the conflict between pets, domestic animals, horses, cows, goats, dogs, cats, and the wildlife. And if these cats and dogs, their population grows, they start to compete. With the wildlife, you have predation, so the cats go and take the iguanas and some birds and finches. You
Like
have
what attack them, kill them?
kill them, eat them, and this is an environment where these animals don't really have predators, or too many anyway.
Yeah.
And then so they compete for the resources as well. So for herbivores like the horses and the goats, they'll eat all the vegetation away from the tortoises.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you've got the other thing, which is they introduce disease. So going in, doing mass sterilization and hopefully vaccination where it's available means that if you keep those under control, you can protect the wildlife.
That's insane. Okay. Like just describe the Galapagos Islands to me, because in my head it sounds like I can't even imagine it.
So, I mean, the Galapagos is exactly as you can imagine it with David Attenborough. The wildlife is there. It's everywhere. It's not like you have to travel special places or with special trips to see it. Some you do. If you want to go diving, you can see whale sharks, manta rays, dolphins, hammerheads was the big thing, and diving is stunning out there. I've got some of those videos actually. I'll have to patch them through to you of diving with manta rays. It's great. And then you have the iguanas and the pelicans, and those are just actually within the towns. They're just amongst you. So it's all they're all very happy with your presence. And you've got so many different ecosystems. So you've got the volcanic part, which is just desolate and arid, and then the areas where the first flora has colonized it. So you get the cactuses, the salt marshes, and the mangroves. And then as it's the hundreds of thousands and millions of years as it's allowed to grow, you've got just full forested, dense forest. So you've got a huge range of ecosystems in one place. So it's not just it's hundreds of ecosystems.
Incredible.
That's why you have so many species with special adaptations, because they are isolated in different ecosystems.
Yeah. And what are the people like?
People are lovely, to be honest, absolutely fantastic. They are working within the community was most of the fun, really. and it was just learning the different cultural traits. Everybody there is very much aware of their environment, and doing their best to try and protect it as well, which is fantastic. There's not many places in the world where the community builds in to protect their environment, but here everybody is very much on the same page, and so it's a real pleasure to see that.
Amazing. So it's been a year, or you spent a year over there?
So it's about 8 months in total there. And
steep learning curve, got straight stuck in, and then obviously you mentioned you faced some challenges.
So this is a very topical part for all of us to understand about epidemiology and with the current COVID outbreak. But when we were out there, we had an outbreak of a distemper. Distemper is a virus that travels by coughing, by secretions, and it affects the lungs and the brain of dogs. It is the biggest global killer of dogs. All our dogs are vaccinated against it. If you get your dog vaccinated, that is the core vaccine. And we had an outbreak of it on this one island in August last year. And in total, we had 148 dogs with symptoms of it. And it's a really difficult thing to deal with because it just spreads like wildfire. You have to, every time you get one of these dogs in, you have to shut the clinic down to a huge, a 40-minute scrub of the environment, even shut down for the afternoon because it's so contagious.
Really?
Yeah, it is really, really contagious. And, it does kill. And we had, that was a huge challenge for us because it was a good 6 weeks of this, of constant inflow of dogs with distemper. Some were very lucky and survived. Others, we did have to put down for welfare grounds because it affects the brain and you're completely, if a dog's seizuring, you can't do much with it if it's distemper. Okay. And it was the biggest challenge of this, of course, was I'd never been faced with that before. I had a team of volunteers who'd never been faced with that before. And the community didn't understand it either. So trying to relay that information of saying what this virus is and tell them about the routes going forward, people didn't appreciate it, and not because of anything, but the fact that they just didn't understand it, which is fair enough. If it's not told to them, then how are people supposed to understand it? And so if you have your dog suffering with this condition, going down very rapidly, deteriorating very rapidly, and we talk to them and say, look, it's distemper, this is what's probably going to happen, we can try with this treatment and support it, but there's a high chance that it won't work. At what point do people listen, and what point do people say, no, I don't take your advice? And you're seeing that with the COVID treatment now. People are being told to stay indoors and people aren't, because they don't understand the danger and the threat these viruses can hold. So we had a good 6 to 8 weeks of this, which was horrendous. It was, I needed a break from the vet profession, I think, for a good month or two after that, because it was just this, complete mindset of having full litters of puppies with distemper, and you can't do anything about it. And this is the reality of going further afield, in areas of the world that don't have access to vaccines or don't get their pets vaccinated because they don't understand. Galapagos is very good compared to other places, but still these things happen. So that was a big lesson I learned and a big eye-opener for me. And I'll be honest with you, I think that was probably the reason why I feel responsibility to going back to the islands.
That sounds so difficult on so many levels. How did you go about managing the situation in terms of your team of volunteers? Like, how did you go about first getting yourself to grips with the entire situation? How did you think about the planning, consequences? Like, what was your thought process in terms of acting at that point in time?
Well, we had a good meeting with the government officials who were very much on it, and they sort of gave their guidelines. But a lot of the people of the communities would come to us, not the government, with their pets. And so we had their instructions there in place. So at least I had that idea to fall back on. But a lot of that was a lot more stricter than I felt I could enforce on the people.
Mm.
And the risk of distemper. So the reason why it's such a concern there is it is transmissible to the sea lions. And the Galapagos sea lion is an endemic species, and it's naive to this virus. And can you imagine that virus hitting the population of sea lions? It would be devastating. So it was always very strict on if we had a distemper case, we'd have to report it to the government. But suddenly, if you have an outbreak of quite a few hundred plus of dogs coming in over a period, then the government are overwhelmed themselves.
Yeah.
So we had to make that decisions. Now our volunteers would change every week, or every week or 2 weeks. So I was reinitiating people into the outcome of what to expect. And then you have a mixture of people who are very experienced vets but have never seen distemper. Yeah. And you've got a mixture of students who aren't experienced vets whatsoever. And trying to manage all of this was hugely exhausting. I had a fantastic vet tech who was with me managing this situation for the entire time, and she was brilliant to take some pressure off and share the pressure. But the calls were always mine.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to expect any volunteer to make the call. I'd have to make the call. So I don't think you can prepare for that environment unless you've experienced it before. And I hadn't experienced before. So I was learning as I was going along. But very, very telling, very, very interesting, huge.
Unbelievable. How did you get it in control, or was that a more natural process?
No, I think a lot of these viruses have a natural end. Okay. Whether it's a case that, unfortunately, all of the animals that are vulnerable to it either die or gain immunity from it, or in certain environments, specifically with distemper, it's the environment and the weather. So when the weather hit, there was it prefers sort of a wetter season, not too wet, but a wetter season, because it can't survive in the environment too long. Okay, it gets killed by sunlight after a few hours. So it requires a host. But the wetter season allows it to persist, less sunlight, more. And so as soon as the hot, dry season was going to come in, we were expecting less cases. But it was just getting, that's, you have a set time. And we said, well, we've got to ensure that the animals that are here now have to be addressed, treated or not, depending on how they present. Because if you have a positive dog, I mean, when it goes into the medical world and the veterinary world, we're very much educated on individual health. Okay, so whoever's in hospital, that is a patient, that person, I will go through everything with that person. Okay, so my focus is the patient that's come into me. My consultation, that dog, if it needs to be admitted, that's my patient. We'll go through A, B, C, D diagnostics. The same with human medicine. That person coming in with a respiratory illness, they're going to be my patient A, B, C, and D. And you care about that person. But when you go into an environment like conservation and arguably veterinary in some areas as well, that all changes. Your focus is the population. And not don't care about the individual, but you'll have to have that bigger picture of saying what is healthy. So if you have an outbreak of distemper virus around your dog population and you're being overwhelmed by it, the focus is to make sure the rest of the dogs stay healthy, because I can't do much with this dog. I can treat it, I can abide by the symptoms. Nothing kills a virus but your own immune system. So if you get an influx of animals coming in, if I send that animal home on treatment, although I know it's positive, I am risking that animal going and interacting with more dogs and perpetuating the spread. So what do you do with a positive case? So it's really difficult. Of course, in our environment, you'd isolate it and make sure it's fun. But in certain areas that's not possible. And so you see the same with the COVID. Of course, individual health is important, and that's what all the nurses and our NHS for us staff are doing. But the government and the industries are looking at the population.
Yeah.
And the individuals, unfortunately, becomes a statistic. They need to make sure the rest of us stay healthy. We isolate. So there's a whole different style of medicine that, I was exposed to.
Yeah. So you've seen both styles, and you've like kind of been exposed to both styles very, very early on.
Yes, yeah. Very, very early in my career, I was very lucky to get that exposure.
Yeah. And it's quite interesting the way you say it, because that kind of mindset at the end of the day of individual versus big picture, and not necessarily versus also, it becomes an either or in that case, but scaling in a way. How do you take what's applicable to one and scale it to many?
Yeah, it's the same in every industry. I mean, there's different results, but the scale, like you say, is the same. It's trying to adjust our vision accordingly,
Yeah.
which the challenge.
But you obviously have to take the call of either helping a population of animals or like making the wrong decision, which would be very, very dangerous. So how do you switch between those mindsets of wanting the best for both?
You can in every aspect, address the best of both with the right amount of people. You can have people who are addressing the individual animal and those addressing the population. But we didn't have enough people. I don't think there's a right answer in that. Every environment is different. I didn't necessarily switch between the two. I tried to address both. Whether I did a good job of it, I don't know. I can't figure that out. I won't know. I did what I thought was right at the time.
Yeah.
But it is self-reflecting on it. I'm still doing that. You're still trying to figure out what I could have done better in that environment and learn from it. But I hope to God I won't be exposed to that environment again. But
Yeah.
it is very important to, and I think it's very important for me as well to spread that understanding to a lot of my peers or students coming through. I've done a few sort of university talks, and I've shown them the videos of these animals with distemper, and just to try and say, look, you're probably never going to see this, because I didn't until I left the UK. But
what were your learnings from it?
What are my learnings?
From that situation, just from dealing with it?
There's so many. It's really hard to. So, you've got the ones, as in a career route. I learnt learnings how to ensure that these animals were healthy, how I could address the population, how I could support the individuals and the animal without compromising the health of others. And I tried my best to learn that. And in certain environments, I may have done that really badly. Other environments, because I was taking more of an emotional call rather than rational call, because you have to acknowledge that emotion plays a big part in this.
For sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
And then you've got to have the other cases, maybe I was too rational and not enough emotional to the needs of the person and their animal. So I think I learned a lot from that side, and of course the other environment is my own frustration with it. My own emotional well-being in trying to encourage this. It is a huge pressure to make those life and death decisions and bear the responsibility of them. And I think the biggest lesson I learned is that I ignored myself for the good 6 to 8 weeks. And when I left the Galapagos after this outbreak, and I came sort of back to the UK, I was so mentally exhausted from it all. I did not really want to see another dog for a few weeks. And I didn't acknowledge that within myself. So I think that's a lesson that I learned more, is I should, the intensity was too great, without giving myself some time to reflect. So I think there's a huge amount of lessons I'm still recalling really from it.
So, there you go. That was part one of my conversation with Ben, and already so much stood out to me from this episode. A big takeaway, I felt, is a way to manage uncertainty and pressure. You can always lower the stakes for yourself, which helps you get started. For example, Ben wasn't committing his life to the Galapagos. He told himself it's only going to be 6 months. Similarly, I've started this podcast as a 6 episode experiment. No pressure. Lowering the stakes like this also addresses that fear of failure. What if I'm not good enough to do it? Should I even start? It's also a reminder to take some time to self reflect. Notice how Ben spoke about balancing his rational and emotional sides? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed part one. Do check out the next episode, which is part two of the same conversation. Thanks for listening.